in. Come away in, come in. Ah, you find me and George downstairs. Partly, you can see we've got the fire going. This is the living room in our new house, and it's a bitter cold January night, as it needs to be, of course, because it's St Agnes Eve, the 20th of January. And hello, George. You're going to come along here. You can go join me if you like, or you can settle down on the floor. You'd be a good dog. In the poem we're going to read, George, there's a beautiful hound with a sagacious eye. You've got a sagacious eye. Anyway, as you can tell, I'm indulging in the annual ritual of reading the Eve of St Agnes on St Agnes Eve. One of my favourite poems of all time. I first read it when I was about 16 and fell in love with it and just carried on reading it. All right, George is going to get up beside you there. Let me just show you. This is a particularly exquisite poem, but this is an exquisite edition. It's the Barbarian Press. It was a present from my friend David Jennings. But look at this. This is hand printed on handmade paper, hand sewn, with Andy English doing these wonderful woodblock prints. So these are printed onto the paper directly from the wood. There it is, the triple arched casement and the full moon and the owl, who for all his feathers was a cold. And there are a number of illustrations like that all the way through. And it's beautifully, beautifully set out, the type. And you can see the Spenserian stanza it's written in this lovely long extra line. Do you see that? This wonderful Spenser and developed this extra syllable, what a pair of syllables, this extra iambic beat on the final line of his stanza. And that's the stanza form that Keats, hundreds of years later, took over and made his own. So it's a glorious story. It's written, of course, he wrote it in the early 1800s. It was 1819 or 20, I think. Maybe it was January of 1820. But it's set in the Middle Ages, and it's set in the kind of romantic, if you like, almost kind of Romeo and Juliet period. And it's a rather Romeo and Juliet-ish story. It's Madeleine, the beautiful young maiden in this great medieval castle, who hears that on the eve of St Agnes, if you say the right prayers and go to sleep sort of supperless and fast and look up at the moonlight, you'll dream a vision of your lover. But of course the man she loves and who loves her is from the rival household, is making his way across the moors and dares to go into his foeman's house, and the story is about their meeting and elopement. And I'm telling you that partly because I'm sure you know the poem anyway, but we haven't time to read the whole thing. But here on this chilly night and amidst the glowing fire, let's just taste it. And the whole poem begins and ends talking about we're in this warm room, but the rest of the house is not warm, and outside it's pretty cold. And the poem is, as it were, a kind of warm, sensual nest enveloped by cold. It starts with, St Agnes Eve, oh, bitter, chill it was. The owl for all his feathers was a cold. And it finishes with the word cold. But just as you might in a cold room get into a bed and make it warm, so there's this beautiful, warm, rich, silken sheeted space, as it were, in the midst of the poem. All the warmer and richer for the contrast. So anyway, let's just have a bit of it. I'll sort of summarise the bits I go over. It's just so good. St Agnes Eve, bitter chill it was. The owl for all his feathers was a cold. The hare limped trembling through the frozen grass, and silent was the flock in woolly fold, numb were the beadsman's fingers while he told his rosary, and while his frosted breath, like pious incense from a censer old, seemed taking flight for heaven without a death, past the sweet Virgin's picture, while his prayer he said. His prayer he saith, this patient holy man, then takes his lamp and riseth from his knees, and back returneth meagre, barefoot, one along the chapel aisle by slow degrees. The sculptured dead on each side seem to freeze, imprisoned in black purgatorial rails, knights ladies, praying in dumb oratories he passeth by, and his weak spirit fails to think how they may ache in icy hoods and mails. Oh, wonderful. You hear that extra long last line, you know, past the sweet virgin's picture while his praise saith, or to think how they may ache in icy hoods and mails. So we start with this freezing scene, the chapel almost empty, the beadsman praying, the frosted breath, the hair limping, trembling through the frozen grass. And then we follow on from the beadsman, and he takes us in the castle, and suddenly we get music and revelry. The silver snarling trumpets can to chide, the level chambers ready with their pride were glowing to receive 1,000 guests. So it's a big, and there's a great sort of party going on. But there's one thoughtful lady whose heart had brooded all that wintry day on love and winged St. Agnes' saintly care. And then we are told the legend. This is Madeleine. They told her how upon St. Agnes' eve young virgins might have visions of delight, and soft adorings from their loves receive upon the honeyed middle of the night, if ceremonies due they did aright, as supperless to bed they must retire, and couch supine their beauties lily white, nor look behind nor sideways, but require of heaven with upward eyes for all that they desire. It's wonderful mixture of holiness, piety, and yet deep sensual yearning. It's just superb. So full of this whim was thoughtful Madeleine. The music, yearning like a god in pain, she scarcely heard. Oh, so there she is, and she gradually decides to make her way, and early and supperless to bed retire, and hope to have these visions. Meanwhile, so purposing each moment to retire, she lingered still. Meantime, across the moors had come young Porphyro, with heart on fire for Madeleine. Beside the portal doors, buttressed from moonlight, stands he, and implores all saints to give him sight of Madeleine. But for one moment in the tedious hours, that he might gaze and worship all unseen, perchance speak, kneel, touch, kiss. In sooth, such things have been. There's the long line. So then he goes in, and he's in great danger because he's in amongst his very foemen, and the only person who knows and loves him in this whole household is the old lady Angela, and happily he meets with her, and she says, "Oh, hide! You know, you're going to be killed," and he says, "No, I've got to see Madeleine," and he says, "Well, Madeleine's going up to bed early. She's not there yet, but she's got this fancy about St. Agnes' Eve," and he suddenly thinks, "Oh, maybe this is meant to be." And he sees a possibility, as Keats puts it. Sudden a thought came like a full-blown rose, flushing his brow, and in his pained heart made purple riot. Then he doth propose a stratagem that makes the beldame, that's Angela, start. "Ah, cruel man, and impious thou art! Sweet lady, let her pray and sleep and dream alone with her good angels, far apart from wicked men like thee. Go, I deem thou canst not surely be the same that thou didst seem." So there's Angela quite properly telling him off and saying, "What do you think you're up to?" But he says, no, my intentions are pure. This is an important verse. People sometimes misread this poem, but he says, "I will not harm her. By all saints I swear," quoth Porphyro. "Oh, may I ne'er find grace when my weak voice shall whisper its last prayer, if one of her soft ringlets I displace, or look with ruffian passion in her face. Good Angela, believe me by these tears, or I will, even in a moment's space, awake with horrid shout my foemen's ears, and beard them, though they be more fanged than wolves and bears." So, not wanting to have an affray in the place, Angela agrees, and she brings him up and lets him come into her room, and she brings this wonderful trolley full of dainties and sweetmeats, from silken Samarkand to cedared Lebanon, and the wine, and he takes his lute up there, and then the poem does this wonderful contrast, like the contrast where Angela, the very old lady, is going down the stairs, and Madeleine is coming up, and then with that, the poem lifts off into just the most beautiful word painting, I think, almost in English. So I'll read you a few more stanzas without comment now, just so you get the lovely scene setting. So here it goes. Her faltering hand upon the balustrade, old Angela was feeling for the stair, when Madeleine, St. Agnes' charmed maid, rose like a mission spirit, unaware, with silver tapers light and pious care she turned, and down the aged gossip led to a safe level matting. There she is, helps Angela. Now, prepare, young Porphyro, for gazing on that bed. She comes again, like ringdove, frayed and fled. Out went the taper as she hurried in, its little smoke in pallid moonshine dyed. She closed the door. She panted, all akin to spirits of the air and visions wide, no uttered syllable, a woe betide, but to her heart was voluble, paining with eloquence her balmy side, as though a tongueless nightingale should swell her throat in vain and die, heart stifled in her dell. A casement high and triple arched there was, all garlanded with carven imageries. There it is, of course, the casement high and triple arched. A casement high and triple arched there was, all garlanded with carven imageries of fruits and flowers and bunches of knot grass, and diamonded with panes of quaint device, innumerable of stains and splendid dyes, as are the tiger moth's deep damasked wings. And in the midst, mongst thousand heraldries of twilight saints and dim emblazonings, a shielded scutcheon blushed with blood of queens and kings. Oh, such a good line. Full on this casement shone the wintry moon, and threw warm gules on Madeleine's fair breast, as down she knelt for heaven's grace and boon. Rose bloom fell on her hands together pressed, and on her silver cross soft amethyst, and on her hair a glory like a saint. She seemed a splendid angel, newly dressed save wings for heaven. Porphyro grew faint. She knelt, so pure a thing, so free from mortal taint. Anon his heart revives, her vespers done, of all its wreathed pearls her hair she frees, unclasps her warmed jewels one by one, loosens her fragrant bodice. By degrees her rich attire creeps rustling to her knees, half hidden like a mermaid in seaweed. Pensive awhile she dreams awake, and sees in fancy fair St. Agnes in her bed, but dares not look behind, or all the charm is fled. Soon, trembling in her soft and chilly nest, in sort of wakeful swoon perplexed she lay, until the poppied warmth of sleep oppressed her soothed limbs, and soul fatigued away, flown like a thought into the morrow day, blissfully havened both from joy and pain, clasped like a missile where swart Paynims pray, blinded alike from sunshine and from rain, as though a rose should shut and be a bud again. Oh, it's just so beautiful, this description of it. Okay, making ready for bed and falling asleep. And then, of course, Porphyro appears and emerges and listens to her breathing and sees her beauty and gazes just upon the empty dress. And then he brings out these wonderful dainties, and heaped with glowing hand on golden dishes and in baskets bright of wreathed silver. And then he says, awake, awake. And she's still deep in her dream. And so He takes her lute and plays it. Awakening, he took her hollow lute tumultuous, and in chords that tenderest be, he played an ancient ditty long since mute, in Provence called La Belle Dame Sans Merci. Of course, that's the title of one of Keats's own poems. Close to her ear touching the melody, wherewith disturbed she uttered a soft moan. He ceased, she panted quick, and suddenly her blue afraid eyes wide open shone. Upon his knees he sank, pale as smooth sculptured stone. And then Keats says something very delicate and beautiful. He says, her eyes were open, but she still beheld, now wide awake, the vision of her sleep. So once in Agnes Eve, she'd been dreaming of Porphyro, of this very man whom she had been forbidden to love, whom it was impossible for her to see because of this enmity of their houses. And she asks him to sing again. Ah, Porphyro, said she, but even now thy voice was at sweet tremble in mine ear, made tunable with every sweetest vow, and those sad eyes were spiritual and clear. And then she asks him to make these vows, and he does, and there's this very beautiful verse. Beyond a mortal man impassioned far at these voluptuous accents, he arose ethereal, flushed, and like a throbbing star seen mid the sapphire heaven's deep repose. Into her dream he melted, as the rose blendeth its odour with the violet, solution sweet. And as he gives you this moment of wonderful, he suddenly brings you back to the cold and the weather. Says, meantime the frost wind blows, like love's alarum pattering the sharp sleet against the window panes. St. Agnes' moon hath set. And then she still thinks she's dreaming, and then he says it's no dream. And then comes the end of the poem where they elope together. They make their way through this house where either of them might be surprised and killed. And there's a beautiful passage which George will take particular interest, where luckily the big lovely hound dog knows them and doesn't make a fuss. So I'll read you the last two verses of the poem. They glide like phantoms into the wide hall, like phantoms to the iron porch they glide, where lay the porter in uneasy sprawl, with a huge empty flagon by his side. The wakeful bloodhound rose and shook his hide, but his sagacious eye an inmate owns. There you are, recognise. By one and one the bolts full easy slide, the chains lie silent on the foot-worn stones. The key turns, and the door upon its hinges groans, and they are gone. Aye, ages long ago these lovers fled away into the storm. That night the Baron dreamt of many a woe, and all his warrior guests, with shade and form of witch and demon and large coughing worm, were long benightmared. Angela the old died, palsy-twitched, with meagre face deformed. The beadsman, after 1,000 aves told, for I unsought for, slept amongst his ashes cold. So we're taken back to that beginning. It's kind of folded in coldness, but also folded in prayer, the prayer of the beadsman. One of the most rich and delicate and both spiritually and sensually wrought poems in English. I wish we'd had time for the whole of it, but anyway, nice for you to drop down below, as we've had a nice warm fire and a glass of claret and the sagacious hound. So it's been good to see you. Happy St. Agnes' Eve.